Hi everyone and welcome to part 2 of the tutorial on Song for George by Eric Johsnon. This is the second and last part of this tutorial. For extra help like Sound Slice, please visit my Patreon page. The tab and notation file can be purchased through the music notes link down below in the description. After covering the verse in part 1, we will now take a look at bridge 1 and 2 as well as the ending. But no worries on how challenging this will be, you only get 4 bars of new music in this part. Both bridges are only 4 bars long, with each of them being only 2 bars of music that are simply repeated. But for one of those bars there are no less than 3 options Eric Johsnon himself uses, depending on what live version you prefer, and I cover all 3 of them. And the ending is nothing else than just the same chord you played in the intro. Ready? Let's go! So straight to work then. Let's continue with the next section of the song. We ended the previous tutorial with the second verse, and after the second verse we dive straight into the first bridge. Tricky section with a lot of pinky work, but I'll play it one time for you and then all the explanation, as always, follows on the other side. Is already the second half of the next verse. Now this is a tricky section, especially for me at this time, because I'm playing on an acoustic guitar with a rather high action. Normally my action is set up very low, much like Tommy Emmanuel's guitar, but because of the double drop detuning this song requires, that low action didn't really work. And I can really feel the blood flowing in my pinky. So be careful if you start practicing this first section with those pull-off double stops, you're really going to feel that. So what is happening in terms of fingering? It's not too difficult. You start out with an open D string and you add a small bar on the 7th fret across the B string and the D string. Then you are going to add to that a small bar on the 10th fret, also over the B string and the high E string. And you're going to pull off from that 10th fret to the 7th fret. With a high action, I can really feel this in the pinky. This is not that easy, so make sure that your guitar is set up properly and you play with a medium to low action for this part. That's what happens. Now, you start out with a sort of timing displacement figure. First, just the 7th fret to the 10th fret and pulling back off. You do this in the rhythm of 1/8 note and 2 16th notes. And after that you drop in the 4th string as a bass note and you head back to the 10th fret. You stay on the 10th fret for 2 more double stops. One more time, maybe even a bit slower. And now we are going to add in that very first bass note. At the end of last lesson I sort of skipped this, but after the very last ending lick of the previous verse there is one low open D string first. This one, that first bass note, is in front of the first beat. So we get 3, 4, and that 7th fret lands exactly on the first beat. 3, 4, 1. You try to keep that low D bass note and you try to keep 3, 4. And then you repeat the exact same thing as you played in the beginning of the bar, but now together with the low D bass note. So 3, 4. The exact same pattern, but you just pluck the low D bass note together with that double stop on the 7th fret. 3, 4. Back to the bass note on the 4th string and back to the 10th fret 2 times and immediately a pull off to the 7th fret. Just maybe that melodic section, that top section by itself. So only that last part in terms of timing, 2 times the 10th fret and then pulling back off to the 7th fret. With the bass line underneath that, 3, 4. And back to the low D bass string. That is the first part, and you are going to repeat that in a second. Just a full repeat, not a single thing has changed. If you play this with a high action like I'm doing now, I can feel that little guy, the pinky, just switching on and off every now and then. And I also felt that while playing through that first example, you now have to switch to, you have a few different options. I'm going to get to that in a second, but you immediately have to switch to sliding and hammer-ons and pull-offs, and it's quite a contrast. On the one hand, you really have to exert that power, that physical strength on the pinky to get that 10th fret sounding right, and then you have to switch over and do all these relaxed and smooth techniques back to back in really quick succession to each other. So do make sure that you get your guitar set up properly. I'm really taking the hard route right now. So one more time, that first bar. And now this next part, maybe you noticed that while I played through it in the very first time that I used 2 different fingerings for what was basically the same melody. The first time and the second time is exactly the same thing. And this was something really cool that I found out while researching this song and watching several live versions by Eric Johsnon. Some of them from the 80s, some of them from the 90s, and some of them really recent, like 2016, 2017. And he keeps changing this part. The easiest part is what I did first, which is just a pull-off part on the high E string using the 5th fret on the high E string, pulling off to the 3rd fret, pulling off to the open string. And basically doing the exact same thing 3 times in a row. And you re-pick the pull-off part each time as you hit the 5th fret. So picking, picking, picking. No hammer-on, no. That will actually make it more difficult to synchronize the timing. And again, there is some timing displacement going on. 1 and 2 and 3. So it's the same thing 3 times in a row, but because of that shifting timing, it does feel a little bit different. Eric sometimes likes to add in a quick slide, going from the 6th fret to the 5th fret. Now we add the bass line underneath that. 3, 4. So that first bass note, that low D string, is something you already played in the previous bar. It just rings out again. And then you have to add in one more open string, 4th string, the D string, to that pull-off pattern. Now the timing or the placement of that D string is really important. You start out by playing that open D string, it's still ringing out from the previous bar, and then you have 1 and 2. The second time around, when you pull off to that 3rd fret, to the index finger on the high E string, that is where you play that open D string at the exact same time. As you land on the 3rd fret, you land the bass note on the D string at the exact same time. One more time. 3, 4. And after that, the pull-off pattern just continues. Then at the end, we're going to look at a few different versions for this little section. But the ending lick, the 4th beat, is the exact same thing each and every time. 3, 4. The it's always on the third and the fourth beat, the exact same melody that always pops up. This is how it goes. As you pull off for the last time to that open E string, you just switch over to fifth position, and that is where the melody will continue. Adding the middle finger on the sixth fret of the B string, then the index finger on the fifth fret of the high E string, and the ring finger, seventh fret on the high E string. So let me play the beginning of the melody as well. Back to the sixth fret on the B string, open E string, so you release both the index finger and the ring finger on the high E string, and then you end up on the fifth fret on the G string. So you switch over that index finger from the E string to the G string, and you just make sure you end up with an open E string. And especially that part skipping from the B string to the high E string, you're going to a thinner string. You might be expecting a higher sounding note. I know this always fools me in the beginning, but the note on the B string sounds higher than the note on the E string. Back to a low D bass string, and you're basically going to play a full repeat. Now this is the easy section. This is always the same fingering. There is a second option. Eric Johsnon is a tone freak, and there is also a version of this lick where he wants to highlight the difference in tone between the B string and the E string. So what does he do? He plays the first part of the lick on the B string, starting on the 9th fret and sliding down to the 8th fret, playing a quick slide from the 9th fret to the 8th fret, pulling off to the 6th fret, and then playing an open E string on top. And then he switches to the 5th fret on the high E string. And then he switches back to the same notes on the B string. So from the 8th fret on the B string to the 5th fret on the E string, and back to the 8th fret on the B string. And then he ends it up with the exact same lick. The 3rd and 4th beat are always the exact same thing. So this is how that sounds if you put it together. 3, 4. Really cool thing is that he also adds in a few extra bass notes here. So that open bass string was the same thing as in the first version. Again, the exact same thing. As you land the pull off on the 3rd fret, you add the open bass string, and then he plays another one when he switches back from the 2nd pull off on the 8th fret to the open E string on top together with the open E string down below. 3, 4. That bass note together with the top E string, and then you follow that up with the exact same lick we used in the previous version. And I think it's a really cool alternative. I mostly use this lick whenever I play this section. I think that extra bass note underneath there sounds really good, fills it up just a little bit more, but also that jumping around is just fun to do. There is even a third alternative, and that is playing no pull-offs at all, and that's going for this fingering. Which is something completely different altogether. In terms of mechanics, it's not too difficult either. So you play 5th fret on the high E string, then with the index finger you play the 6th fret on the B string. You already put that down, you need that note for the last lick too. And then back to the high E string, and you remove the index finger, which is the same lick. And Eric Johsnon mostly uses this lick in an earlier version, and he adds in a lot of blues curls on that 6th fret. This fingering gives him the opportunity to do that, and it's a lot harder if you want to combine that with those endless pull-offs on the top string. So this is what he plays most of the time whenever he uses this fingering. And I think it's really cool that there are these 3 options. Eric probably figured this out over decades. So he went for the first version in the 80s, figured out the second version with some variation in the 90s, and then went for a third version even later on. And I think it's incredibly cool to see an icon like that still working on what is one of his most iconic songs. So that's why I decided to include all 3, and you can pick whatever you like best. Let's add those 2 bars together. I went for my favorite lick with the jumping around, and now you basically repeat whatever you choose 2 times in a row, and that is the first bridge. Straight into the next part. I'm going to hurt my pinky one more time by playing this really slowly. I hope that is going to work out, and then we'll have a look at the rest of the tune. 3, 4. Slide down and we head into the next verse, but we start in the middle of the verse, straight away on the F part. Everything else, plain repetition. End up there, we jump straight into the second bridge. Second bridge consists mostly of a melody played down below on the bass strings, and luckily isn't nearly as pinky intensive as the previous bridge. I'm going to play through it once. Here we go. Really cool bridge, really cool. A lot of picking with the middle finger and index finger on the bass strings, but you'll see it's quite doable if you put it all together. You start low D bass note, and then together the 4th string together with the open E string on top. You add in the middle finger on the 3rd fret on the A string, and you alternate straight back to the open D string while keeping down the 3rd fret. There is, in terms of picking, thumb on the low E string, then the thumb travels to the D string and plugs that together with the middle finger on the high E string. Then again the thumb to the A string, and then I alternate to the index finger for the open D string. That gives the thumb the possibility to head back to the low D string. Then the middle finger jumps over to the D string, again 3rd fret, you plug this again with the thumb. Then index finger 2nd fret on the G string, you plug this with the index finger and you pull off to an open G string. Together with everything else. Thumb goes back to the low D string, index finger to the 4th string, the regular D string, and the thumb straight back to the low D string. You plug this thumb, index finger, thumb. Middle finger jumps back over to the A string and you pick index finger on the A string, middle finger on the open D string. Maybe even a bit slower, that first bar. That's the full first bar, maybe even slower. Second bar starts again with an open D string down below and then a full D power chord on top. I plug this with a thumb and then thumb with the index finger and middle finger on top. Middle finger drops back down on the 3rd fret of the A string. And again I plug thumb, index finger. Thumb moves back to the low E string, middle finger jumps back over to the D string, and the index finger will pluck that note once more. Then you switch over the index finger to the 1st fret on the B string and you let go of the ring finger. You pluck with the index finger and middle finger the B string fretting the 1st fret and the open G string at the same time, and then you add in the ring finger on the 3rd fret and you pluck again. That's that section. Middle finger jumps back over to the 3rd fret on the A string and you end that bar with just another pluck of that D power chord. A lot, I know, but once it all clicks, you'll see that it's quite doable. And you play another open A string, hammer on to the 3rd fret, open D string, and this little hammer-on lick sounds kind of familiar. We played it in the first verse too. Will lead us into the repeat of the second bridge. The first 2 bars we just played, we are going to repeat them in full, and that is basically the last new stuff you will have to learn for this song. Let me play through that second bar really slowly one more time. Up back on that low D string. Let's put those 2 bars together. And now, the second time around, you just play the exact same thing. Without the last run into the next part, that little hammer-on lick at the end is gone. That is everything. So 2 times the exact same thing with only that little hammer-on lick to connect part 1 and 2. Let me try and play through it really slowly all the way, and then you're basically done with this tune. The second time around, I forgot to mention this, I tried to keep that D chord or that D power chord shape down as long as possible, to try and let everything ring out as long as it can. So the first time around you won't see it. Now I keep it down. just to bind everything together as much as possible. Once you've done that, you head back into, as we did before, the second half of the verse. And that's the only thing that happens after the bass lick. Open the bass string, and then the same thing as we did in the intro, starting out with the ring finger on the 3rd fret. Instead of strumming in the direction of the bass strings, we now just use the thumb to go down from the bass note to the top string, and then we add in the 2nd fret to end the tune with. So just that last. I hope you have fun going through this. This is a really sentimental tune for me, one of the first fingerstyle songs I ever learned, and even 25 years later, it's still a cracker. Take your time as always, and I will see you again soon for more fingerstyle stuff. Bye bye.